Hey everyone, Cursed Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and today we've got a Sygg River Cutthroat deck sent to me by my friend Darcy. Darcy says what needs improvement? That they haven't built a commander deck in about 10 years, so they're not sure about the mana base, mana source count, not sure if there are mandatory includes or cards to avoid as they draw too much hate immediately. On the subject of any deck building restrictions, they say no tutors, including fetches, no infinite combos, and they don't want to spend more than $10 on a new card for the deck unless it was really juicy. Now, they're also having a few niche cards because best moments in EDH from memory are blowing the table out with some obscure stupid card. And then hands off the Prodigal Sorcerer because he's a tribute to OG Magic. Fair enough, we won't touch the Prodigal Sorcerer. I'm not sure which ones are the niche cards. We're going to go and most likely those are the ones I'm going to pick apart, but we'll see what we can do. As always, this deck list is in the video description below. If you're watching this on your computer or on your phone, or if you're listening to me, I recommend that you open up the deck list yourself and take a look first at the Sygg deck. See what you would change before I go through everything, right? It's always good to take a fresh kind of look. And then after which, let's see if we agree. Let's see what you would take out. And if you think of something I haven't thought of, I'd love if you post it in the comments below because the goal here is to make this deck the best version possible. All right. So who is Sygg and why are we using them? So Sygg is a hybrid blue-black for 2 mana Merfolk Rogue. They're a 1/3, and they say at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you may draw a card. What a great fish. So Sygg is what we tend to look at as I don't want to say a general commander. I mean, an average strength, not niche commander, where the power of the commander doesn't require you to build an entire deck around it, that they're strong enough on their own, and what they do is strong and repeatable, right? We are jumping through a hoop, and the hoop that we want at the beginning of any end step is that an opponent lost 3 or more life. It's an opponent, it doesn't matter how many opponents, and it doesn't matter how they lost the life. If it was from them using their own cards, another opponent attacking another, or our abilities, it doesn't matter. So with that in mind, a deck like this is just happy to create board states where this is going to be triggered as often as possible. But since we're out of red, it is kind of hard without access to bolts to trigger this every turn. So I think a deck like this is pretty happy thinking of it as, once per cycle you'll draw an extra card, and then maybe if the setup is right, you can get 2 or 3 draws in a turn cycle, but it's not the utmost required thing, right? If you can't get it every turn cycle, I think the deck will be fine. So the next thing I want to take a look at is the mana curve. And we can see here that at 7 mana, we've got 4 cards, and at 8 mana, we have 1 card. So immediately, my eye always comes to this section, also the 6, to see what we can change or take out, and are these cards really essential? Because that's a lot of mana in a deck that doesn't play green or isn't about ramping. So you can see here, one of our 7 mana cards is Seagate Restoration, so already pretty solid. I didn't see this before. This deck is apparently 44% casual, 56% competitive. I don't know what that means. I wonder how they come to that conclusion. Coming back, Seagate Restoration is a 7 mana card, but most likely we're playing it as a land, so it's not a problem. Avatar of Woe is an 8 mana card, but costs 2 less to cast. We'll get back to her in a second. Hallbreaker Horror is a fantastic creature in this deck at 7 mana. Death Rattle Oni is another 7 mana card that gets cheaper, but we'll get back to that. And Lochmere Serpent is 6 mana, which is our 6 mana card. Now our other 7 mana card is Discovery Dispersal, but I'm going to count it as a 5 mana card. You can't fuse these. This is discovery or dispersal. Yeah, these don't have fuse, so you're casting one or the other. Both of these halves of the card are pretty decent. They're nice filler cards at a low level of power or a medium level of power. Dispersal has to a lot more use in the deck as it's built. So, what is the main theming of this deck? At a glance, I can tell that there is a very large instant selection and there's a very large flash selection. So immediately, I want to lean into that because I think that's an interesting way to build this deck. Because it allows you to use Sygg as card advantage and then hold up mana through your opponent's turns. Are we going to be able to make the greatest flash deck using these colors? No, but I think black blue has a lot of flash strength that isn't already included here that I'd like to include. But first, before we go any further, I want to look at some of these outliers, scrutinize them, and see to what degree we want to keep these cards in. So let's go, strangely enough, from the bottom to the top. I'm going to go backwards. And one of the first things I want to point out is that the instant section here is very, very strong. False Cure is a bit weak, but I understand that it's there to work with Sygg, and it is a nice little trap to sometimes knock out an opponent. I think this is one of those cards Darcy was talking about, where, you know, this card is here to it has a niche application, but it can knock a player out of the game immediately. So I don't know. I used to play a deck that would an Eiley deck that would gain like millions of life in one go, and this would be great against that. But outside of that, I don't know how strong it is. I'm gonna let this be because it is instant, so it fits in our theming really well. So it's kind of a low cost. And in theory, if a player gains 2 life, you can cast this to trigger Sygg. Now I want you to think about that though. Black black, target opponent loses 4 life, and you draw a card. That's pretty bad. That's the floor is really really low. I didn't say it, but once again, the test we're running for this card is a floor to ceiling test. The floor is no one gains life and it rots in your hand, and the ceiling is that someone gains 100 life and you immediately defeat them. So with that in mind, I'm just gonna say nice and easy. This is okay. The fact that it kind of will stop someone who gains 2 or 3 life in order to draw a card is enough that I'm fine with it. It's easy enough to see your opponents gaining that much life. I don't see that being a problem. Yeah, so instants are really nice. The artifacts are really nice. Vorpal's Sword is a bit of a weird inclusion here because well, I think we have enough flying creatures that it should be fine. All right, let's leave it out. Sorcery is also very nice. Board clears and 2 flip lands. Very nice. All right. Now, this is the parts that I wanted to talk about. Let us talk about our enchantments and our creatures. So, Revenge of the Ravens and where are you? Hissing Miasma do the same thing here. Revenge of the Ravens and Hissing Miasma both punish opponents for attacking you. This is like a pseudo ghostly prison / propaganda effect where it de-incentivizes your opponents from attacking you, but does not actually stop them from attacking you. Now, if you wanted to use these cards, since you're in blue, the first thing I'd like you to do I know how to spell propaganda? I do. Is to consider propaganda before you consider either of these cards. Why? Well, propaganda is easier to cast than either of those cards, is one of the first things. But the other thing is propaganda sets up situations where your opponents cannot attack you because they want to play out turns, they want to play out creatures, spells, whatever. They want to hold up mana. Now they can't attack you. The cost of them paying a life is negligible in Commander. They've got 40 life. They're going to spend it. And if one would say, but the life loss will trigger Sygg if they lose enough life, I'm going to suggest they're not going to allow you to do that. They're more often than not are going to play around that. Revenge, you need both of them in play for them to not attack you with two creatures. If you have only one in play, they'll attack you with two creatures. This stops strategies that go wide from attacking you, but people who have a singular large creature will not be deterred by either of these spells. And in fact, it's good to remember that if they have a lethal board, even if they lose 5 or 6 life to attack you to defeat you, they'll still do it. Sygg triggers end of turn. You're not drawing that card in response to the attack, and therefore you won't be able to stop the attack from happening. With that in mind, I don't think either of these cards are doing anything particularly strong, and if you want that effect, I would say Propaganda. Vile Consumption is cool. I have not seen this. I think it is a little tricky with the number of creatures you are playing. But if you take some of your creatures as ETBs only, such as Baleful Strix or Snapcaster Mage, I do understand how it would be worth just leaving here, because you can just let those die as your life total dwindles. But I do like Vile Consumption. Soul Barrier. Does Soul Barrier affect all your opponents or just one? Because it says target there. Okay, whenever an opponent. So whenever an opponent casts a creature spell, Soul Barrier deals 2 damage. Okay, so I get what's going on here, and I think it's kind of interesting. I don't want to say no to this immediately. I like how this is 2/3 of a Sygg trigger. With that and, Vile Consumption on, you're almost guaranteed to draw a card at the end of each turn, which is why I'm going to say leave it in. However, if you don't get that second piece in, it doesn't do as much as it feels it should. Soul Barrier looks really, really cool, but it either makes people, so either players were casting multiple creature spells a turn and this will stop them, or they weren't and this won't stop them. If I'm going to tap out to play a big creature, I'll probably take the 2 damage with the idea that it might gain you a life. I guess the comparison here is Rhystic Study, which is a really, really intense comparison to make. But in this deck, this kind of functions like Rhystic Study, where your opponents have the option to pay mana in order to stop you from drawing a card. Except for here, with our Soul Barrier, they need to pay 2, and Soul Barrier needs to trigger twice, or it needs to trigger in addition to another trigger to do that last point of damage. And I'm a big believer that if a card is being compared to something as strong as Rhystic Study, then it's good. This is only being compared to Rhystic Study on the basis that it works with Sygg. So there's a lot of hoops for this card to jump through to be good. I would like to see this in action. And since I play with Darcy, I think I will. And I will have to revisit my opinion on this card. It looks really neat. I think it could be really good here, or it could just be so-so. My main problem with this, and we'll return to that, is that with so much of the deck being at instant speed, I want to be really, really, I want to scrutinize the cards that force us to tap out on our turn. Soul Barrier being one of them. However, I think it's good enough. Parasitic Impetus. I think there's 2. There's a blue one you can play too. The blue one is Psychic, and it doesn't give flying, unfortunately. Whenever it attacks, you scry 2, and Parasitic says its controller loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. If you like one, I would play the other. It's not the attack trigger you care about, it's the fact that it's forced to attack your opponents. Considering if you don't put it on a 0/1, it'll be 3 power, so if it gets let through, you'll get the draw anyways, so it's not particularly bad. Um, the fact that on attack parasitic impetus uh, gives you 2/3 of a Sygg trigger isn't bad. But once again, it's really going to depend if you can get that last point of damage in or not, because otherwise it's kind of not as important. And if that 2 damage was going to set you up to do like that's the 3 damage total, I'll add it up for Sygg. There's a chance that the goad will just do another 3 damage, and therefore it didn't really matter the attack trigger on the parasitic impetus. I don't know. Once again, this is fine. You will find out how good it is. But if you're playing one, you should probably play the other. Leaden Fists has flash, so I already like it. It buffs a creature and taps it down permanently. I think this is interesting once again in this kind of deck. I think this is the kind of card you like a lot because it's tricky, right? There's a lot of play patterns with this. The ceiling is really, really high because you can use this on other players' combat steps when they're attacking into each other. And once a creature is blocked, you can cast this spell to kind of really mess with the combat math and remove a creature that was otherwise unremovable. This is really good. I do really like this here. As foretold, works great here. It once it ticks up, it lets you cast a majority of your spells for free. Just note that 3 or 4 turn cycles is a long, long time in Commander. It's going to be a while for this to hit 3, and by the time it hits, I think I would just count this only being able to hit 3. Do not live in a world where this can hit 4. It's not going to be able to do that, unfortunately, and so don't worry too much about that. But with the amount of 0 and 1 mana spells that you have, I think you're going to get a lot of use out of that. Animate Dead sticks out here. What are you reanimating? I understand this is probably a catch-all card, but this kind of catch-all card isn't as good as you think it is in Commander. Very rarely are people just dropping really big cards into Commander that you can kind of just value reanimate. I know it feels like the antithesis. Like you could see this and you could be like, oh, not only is it getting a creature back from an opponent's graveyard, it's also graveyard hate because it stops them from getting it back too. I get that. I used to run Animate Dead in all of my black decks because I felt like the opportunity cost was really, really low and the ceiling was really, really high. It turns out that's not true. The opportunity cost is a little higher than you'd expect. You have a card that's dead in your hand. And the ceiling is actually, or like the ceiling is high, but the floor is a lot lower than you think. There's a lot of scenarios where you're going to be looking at the board, Animate Dead's rotting in your hand, and you need to cast something. Now, we think of the floor being like, oh, I can get Solemn Simulacrum out of the graveyard. That's not real anymore. Most people aren't playing just random good creatures that just die. They will either be reanimating their own creatures or they'll be blinking their own creatures. You know, they've planned around their graveyard most of the time. And though it's cool that you can animate an Eternal Witness with this, it's just kind of okay at the end of the day because later in the game you're going to be wishing you hadn't. Later in the game there's going to be that one turn with Animate Dead that you'll be like, oh, if only I kept it, I could get back. Insert giant card, right? So with that in mind, I don't really like Animate Dead without a target in your own deck. And there isn't really one here. Hallbreaker Horror is the closest one, and even then, I don't know. I'm not particularly impressed. If Hallbreaker Horror dies, you were kind of behind anyways, right? When Hallbreaker Horror is out, you should be very far ahead of the game. You should already have Counter Magic up. So, yeah, I don't think this really belongs here. If you're playing against me and I have a graveyard combo that can win me the game, and you think you can animate Dead it from like underneath my nose, that's not going to happen. I'm players who play reanimate or graveyard strategies know how to work their graveyard better than you do, and Animate Dead does not exile the creature; it simply pulls it out of the graveyard. it is pretty easy to put that creature back in the graveyard, so it doesn't particularly work as hate either. So I'm not too impressed. I think I would toss this pretty easily. All right, let's take a look at the creatures. Avatar of Woe, I think, is just a remnant of old Magic. Unfortunately, it looks really good, but it plays like that assassin, royal assassin, destroy target tapped creature. And this card isn't good enough for commander at 3 mana. This card is 8 mana, and it is really hard to have 10 or more creature cards in all graveyards. It feels easy because you think you have 3 opponents, but it doesn't happen as much as you think. And it's just fine. It's too much mana. It doesn't do as much as you think. I would rather just a really good ETB effect or Hallbreaker Horror 9 times out of 10. Death Rather Oni, I was going to be really hard on it, but then I realized it had Flash, and I've changed my mind. I think it works with the deck, so these are fine. Shriek Maw is fine. Nimrus is really, really good here. I really like Nimrus. I also like Nimrus as a backup commander. If you ever wanted to flip them out, you can. Both of these cards are what I would consider generally good commanders for a deck like this. Notion Thief we'll get back to. Ebon Death is fine. Clique is fine. Portal Mage is fine. The rest, we have a lot of really good flash creatures. Lawyer Subordinate is fantastic with Sygg River Cutthroat. Wall of Souls is weird. I feel like this is one of those cards that you feel is a corner case or as a reference. It's not going to do what you want it to do. Wall of Souls is one of those defenders. There's a few of these that reflect damage. And unfortunately, it's not going to be relevant. People will not attack into your walls, especially this wall, unless they need to, and then it's going to defeat you. Um, I think I think the evasion that comes with late game threats is being underestimated here, or the fact that your opponents are going to go wide and attack you with like 32 twos, and then all of a sudden, the once again, the Wall of Souls does nothing. And if it really bothers them, they'll remove it, but they won't. Sometimes we have the mentality of like, if they destroy Wall of Souls, they're not destroying Sygg, River Cutthroat. But it doesn't work that way because they're only going to destroy Wall of Souls when they need to defeat you. Up until that moment, they won't. So it's not like they're preemptively using their removal and losing it against something else. They'll just hold it. And when it comes to the point of the game that they're just going to win and they need to destroy the Wall of Souls, they'll do it then. So it's they can even do it after blocks because Wall of Souls triggers on damage. So they can let you go to blocks and then either blink their creature, destroy Wall of Souls. This is just it has it does so very little, unfortunately. It is a meta investment, it's one of your creatures on the board, and it just is not going to do anything the whole time. So I would cut that. Surge Engine, I would I'm seeing that it's 2 mana and 1 blue to make it a Sig trigger every turn. I would have to see this in action. I think it's a really, really interesting. I think it's a really, really interesting idea. I would have to see it in action. I think it's close. I really like that this is a guaranteed trigger each turn, and that after the 2 mana, the rest of it is just it's just an ability, so you can activate it on other people's turns to get back to you while holding up mana. I really like that. So I've convinced myself into it. I think this is a great card. Spellskite doesn't do as much as you think in Commander, but it's still a solid card here. And I think the rest are pretty strong. Hex Parasite stands out. I'm not quite sure why you have this here. I think this is one of those fun catch-all cards. I am struggling to imagine scenarios where Hex Parasite is a blowout. What it does is sometimes kind of mess up combat math or occasionally take out a planeswalker. And I don't think that's good enough. I think this is a little too niche. Yeah, I would cut the Hex Parasite. And the land base looks pretty good, I would say. There's a lot of basics, but it is the nature of a deck like this to have a lot of basics if we're not playing fetches. So the rest of the deck looks very, very nice. Okay, so As we're at 25 minutes, this is a good time to talk about some inclusions I would like. Some cards that I think are pretty clutch. This is Clutch of the Undercity. It's another instant spell. You're going to notice the cards I'm going to suggest are all instant or flash spells. Clutch of the Undercity is particularly good here because its controller loses 3 life. Now it has Transmute on the other end. I know you said no tutors. You do not have to cast that Transmute spell, so don't worry about that. You can use it as a nice and fair 1 blue, blue, black, bounce something, trigger Sygg, which I like quite a bit. Then let's look at a few options for Flash. I think the Flash element of the deck is particularly strong, so I want to immediately put in Cunning Nightbonder. Cunning Nightbonder reduces the cost of your Flash cards, is a Flash card. I like that very much. Another very good payoff in the colors is Slitherwisp. Slitherwisp says whenever you cast a card with Flash, you draw a card, and each opponent loses 1 life. It's really that card draw that you really like, and it's just another Flash threat. Slitherwisp itself is a 3 mana card, sorry, a 3 power card, which means it can attack into boards where your opponents can't block to draw off of Sygg. I really, really like that. I guess you could cast 3 flash spells to trigger Sygg, but that seems a bit much, I will say. Wave Break, Hippocamp. Uh, this says whenever you cast your first spell first spell during your opponent's turn, draw a card. This gives you 3 opportunities to draw an extra card if you're going off on your opponent's turns. I really like that. It's just a bit of redundancy with Sygg. It does something very similar to Sygg, just in a different way, and I do really like that. You're kind of light on draw cards, which I guess this is just, I'm going to take a break to point out. I wouldn't mind things like, as I always say, Phyrexian Arena, is pretty good. But here I would like Read the Bones primarily because it's easier to cast in these colors. It does tap you out, but it gets you the cards you want now that can set up your next few turns because you need to be able to go instant speed a lot. Just having 1 or 2 of these kind of cards that just draw you cards when you don't have Sygg out is probably pretty good. Looking back, Rewind is a counterspell that untaps your mana, letting you to hold up more mana on other people's turns. This is a pretty big staple of Flash decks. And it has a similar one, like a cousin of sorts of Unwind that is 1 mana less, but it is only non-creature spells. Then it untaps its lands. These are sometimes used with cards that lands that produce more mana than 1. I don't know if you're playing. Don't remember which one the bounce land is in blue black. It would be Dimmer, right? Looks like you're not. If you were, I think it's the Aqueduct. Dimmer, Aqueduct. Yep, if you were playing the Aqueduct, which is a pretty easy land to play in these decks, cards like Rewind and Unwind both get considerably better. Vencer as well is another flash card that is particularly good, as it has a lot of utility. And then I really want to say Mystic Teachings, but you said no tutors. I'm still going to put it here. Mystic Teachings, tutors for an instant card or a card with flash, reveal it, put it into your hand, flashback 5 and a black. I don't think you're ever going to be sad to play this, mainly because you can't use this to tutor a win condition. Actually, that's not true. You can tutor your Hallbreaker horror. Well, it's here anyways. I'm still going to put it on the table. I know you didn't want it. Uh, if you ever wanted something, this is kind of the perfect card in a deck like this. But moving forward, thinking of Vencer, I'm reminded of Urtai, Resurrected, who did something very similar, where it's a flash creature that exchange for letting its controller draw a card, it lets you counter spell, activated ability, or triggered ability, or destroy a creature or planeswalker. If you like Clique, this is very similar to Clique in that you are exchanging something out of someone's hand or field or stack. I don't know. I've never been impressed by this, but people keep playing this, so I think it's if you like Clique, which I don't, which is fair. If you like Clique, you'll like this. So you're already playing Clique, I would say to play this for sure. After that, trying to think of any other really big flash creatures in blue and black. Let's do a quick check. Flash creature, and let's just look at 7-ish mana. Mana value greater than 6. See if there's anything we've missed here. And I think the only one worth saying is how, let's see how expensive Jin-Gitaxias is. Jin-Gitaxias is about $4. Oh, it just got reprinted. If you like this ability, Jin-Gitaxias is a nice little finisher for your deck, in addition to Hallbreaker Horror. Is it Hallbreaker or Hallbreacher? Hallbreaker Horror. In addition to Hallbreaker, this is a very good finishing creature for the deck. You can flash it in, make someone discard their hand, and at the end of your turn, you draw 7. Very, very hard to lose when you have him out, and you have counter magic, which you do have a few free counter magic spells with Misdirection and Force of Will, so I don't see it impossible for you to be able to protect these cards, even with so much mana. Speaking of mana, Felwar Stone is probably a good inclusion here, just as another mana rock. I think you're a little light. You have Arcane Signet, Dimmer Signet. There should be one more, which is the Talisman. So I would add Felwar Stone, and I would think of adding Talisman of Dominance as well, which just got reprinted. Oh, it is already in there. Okay, I just saw that art and recognized it. Okay, perfect. So I would add Felwar Stone, though, because I don't think it hurts to have an additional card. And if you find yourself needing a little more, Charcoal Diamond and Sky Diamond, though they come in tapped, are additional sources of ramp. You're in a color that doesn't have much ramp, and you have a few really, really strong spells at 6 or 7 mana. I wouldn't mind the ability to cast them on like earlier than intended. With a card like Sygg, I'm not too worried about you having all your land drops as long as you keep attacking, as long as you keep getting triggers. As long as people are playing the game, Sygg will be drawing you cards, and during that time, you will get enough lands to make your land drops. Um, I'm trying to think of any other flash creatures that I particularly like. If you like, I believe there's a flash clone. I feel like if you like the idea of having a creature or having a card that works really well and wins games out of nowhere, like one of those tricky cards, Stunt Double is really nice because it's just a flash clone effect that is at the same mana cost as clone, which is really nice. Lets you hold up mana, lets you do something tricky, lets you feel clever. I think these are important things in a deck like this, so I like it. I think these are the kind of points I would make for this deck. I think the deck is pretty strong. It is apparently 44% casual, but 56% competitive. Not sure what that means, but I do like this setup. I think it's interesting. Um, I do Hullbreaker Horror with Jin Cataxius. I would feel a little more confident in your ability to finish a game. Right now, I guess my biggest worry is how do you finish games without Hallbreaker Horror? But with Jin Cataxius, with the other flash creature, which is Slitherwisp, you can start pinging your opponents down and win with like a torrential amount of card advantage. So wins aren't going to be super easy, which is kind of intended from what I've seen. You are purposely not playing any infinite combos that win you the game. So with that in mind, this is going to be a grindy deck, but I think you have the tools to grind out your opponents. I've said I'd come back to this. Notion Thief is a standout, not because it is not good. In fact, it is very, very good. I believe in your message you said, or cards to avoid because they draw too much hate immediately. So, I'm going to take a moment to round out this video by talking about how sometimes the cards we play are going to be treated at a higher power level than the deck itself is. Notion Thief, when you play Notion Thief, people are going to assume that you're playing wheels. Because if you wheel after Notion Thief, everyone loses their hand and you draw like 28 cards. So Notion Thief is going to attract a lot of hate, but Notion Thief is not so powerful that it can't be removed, and therefore they just need to kill it. They're not going to try to defeat you, right? This isn't a card that puts, it's not like putting 10 lands into play where the advantage is so high that your opponents have to take you out of the game. Notion Thief just needs to be removed. And you can choose to protect him or you can choose to let him go depending on the scenario and how much hate he attracts. So I don't think you should be thinking about it in the kind of like, will this card knock me out of the game? No. Will this card be treated like it can knock your opponents out of the game? Yes, probably. But their anger, I say anger, their attention will be focused on Notion Thief and not so much you. Notion Thief is actually really easy to deal with. It has 1 health. A lot of red, black spells will kill it. White has a lot of answers to this. It's not too bad. And some of your opponents might leave him around because maybe it benefits them to have that on the field, but it's just going to be fine. I think you're playing this as a flash effect primarily, and I think that's going to be good enough. Okay, I went a little longer on this one because this is the first EDH deck they made in 10 years, and I wanted to go a little slower. I think the deck is fine. This is a very good first draft for what I would consider a mid-power deck, and I'm interested to see how it kind of gets more specific. If it does go into a flash sub theme, further into the flash sub theme, I think it'd be really interesting. But that'll be up to the deck builder to decide. As always, if you have the next draft of your deck, I would be very happy to take a look at it if you put it into the form below, or if anyone has another deck they'd like me to look at, the form in the YouTube video description will send your deck list to me, and I will be able to improve it, hopefully. So I can't wait for this to be completely built, and I'm excited to see it in action. Good luck.